Born to Annoy, From Rebel to Revolutionary, Chapter 4, The Wages of Sin. By this time the political and economic situation was deteriorating fast, and Harold Macmillan's government was running into trouble. Despite his laid-back and grouse-moor image, Macmillan was a one-nation Tory, taking his inspiration to some extent from the young Disraeli. My interest in politics was developing fast, and I had plenty of amateur political experts to turn to for advice. But Maggie remained the most consistent, and, looking back with the pure science of hindsight, she turned out to be the most reliable. I have already mentioned she had urged me to read Disraeli's political novels. Now, as a result of my questions, she drew my particular attention to a passage in Sybil, from which the philosophy of one-nation Toryism adopts its name. To cut a long story short, the key characters in the novel are a young aristocrat, an elderly trade unionist and chartist, the latter's religious daughter, and a young socialist. The aristocrat, namely Egremont, is seeking information about the world he inhabits, unsure about his future role in a society where all the old relationships between the classes are being torn asunder by mechanization and the rapid growth of manufacturing capitalism. The characters meet not long after the young Victoria has ascended to the throne. Disraeli relates the following conversation between them. "It is a community of purpose that constitutes society," continued the younger stranger. "Without that, men may be drawn into contiguity, but they still continue virtually isolated." "And is that their condition in cities?" "It is their condition everywhere, but in cities that condition is aggravated. A density of population implies a severer struggle for existence, and a consequent repulsion of elements brought into too close contact. In great cities, men are brought together by the desire of gain. They are not in a state of cooperation, but of isolation. As to the making of fortunes, and for all the rest, they are careless of neighbours. Christianity teaches us to love our neighbour as ourself. Modern society acknowledges no neighbour." "Well, we live in strange times," said Egremont, struck by the observation of his companion, and relieving a perplexed spirit by an ornery exclamation, which often denotes that the mind is more stirring than it cares to acknowledge, or at that moment is capable to express. "When the infant begins to walk, it also thinks that it lives in strange times," said his companion. "Your inference?" asked Egremont. "That society still in its infancy is beginning to feel its way." "This is a new reign," said Egremont. "Perhaps it is a new era." "I think so," said the younger stranger. "I hope so," said the elder one. "Well, society may be in its infancy," said Egremont, slightly smiling, "but, say what you like, our Queen reigns over the greatest nation that ever existed." "Which nation?" asked the younger stranger, "for she reigns over two." The stranger paused. Egremont was silent, but looked inquiringly. "Yes," resumed the younger stranger after a moment's interval, "two nations, between whom there is no intercourse and no sympathy, who are as ignorant of each other's habits, thoughts, and feelings as if they were dwellers in different zones or inhabitants of different planets, who are formed by a different breeding, are fed by a different food, are ordered by different manners, and are not governed by the same laws." "You speak of," said Egremont hesitatingly, "the rich and the poor." Maggie explained to me that Disraeli had a genuine sympathy for the plight of the labouring poor, coupled with a hatred of the factory system, a deep contempt for the middle-class manufacturers who controlled it, and the Liberal Party who represented them. She explained how he had aided the Chartist movement, both morally and financially, and had finally brought in the 1867 Reform Act, which gave a section of the working class the vote for the first time, albeit a very tiny and relatively higher paid section, the right to vote still being based on the ownership of property and the amount of rates one paid. She argued that Macmillan was of the same ilk, albeit in different circumstances, where the interests of the manufacturers had triumphed and become the dominant power in society. Unfortunately for the British people, Macmillan would turn out to be the last of his breed to hold office as Prime Minister. He had witnessed not only the horrors of the Second World War and the way the people of all classes had rallied and worked together to defeat the Nazi and imperialist Japanese enemies, but had also witnessed the terrible and devastating effects of the Great Depression and been moved by the hunger marches of the unemployed. As a result, he was committed to a policy of full employment and the welfare state. He had also come to the conclusion, in sharp contrast to his predecessors, Anthony Eden, whose Suez adventure had proved both disastrous and humiliating, and Winston Churchill before him, that Britain's days of empire were well and truly over. He'd underlined this position by making his Wind of Change speech, and had chosen the heartland of the apartheid regime of South Africa to make it. Despite, or maybe because of her particular brand of communism, Maggie had a genuine respect for both Disraeli and Macmillan, not because she believed that their aims of achieving a united nation could be realised without ending the capitalist system itself, but because she believed their motivations were genuine. She also explained something else to me, which began to clarify my confused thoughts on the question of them and us. This is the way she put it. It's important to understand that individual capitalists are not wicked people, Malc. They are as much victims of the economic system as the most exploited workers. I found this statement incredible and told her so. Maggie laughed at my reaction. Malc, the capitalist system enslaves both the capitalist and the labourer. The capitalist chains may be made of gold and the workers of wrought iron, but they are chains nonetheless. Moreover, workers tend to bind together and assist their fellows to struggle against the predicament in which they find themselves, whereas the capitalist tends to be corrupted by his wealth and power over others and his greed for more of the same. So-called free market economic forces are both cutthroat and anarchic. They force him to compete against his fellow manufacturers, and they in turn are forced to seek to undercut him and do him down at every opportunity. This idea had not even entered my simple mind, but Maggie had much more to say. As Disraeli pointed out, this leads him to isolation from his fellow human beings. He tends to lose the capacity to empathise with those whose labour he exploits, the selfsame people who create his wealth. He no longer regards them as people with human needs and human aspirations, but merely hands. If you walk down Ashton Hall Road today, you can still see the faded signs outside factories proclaiming "hands wanted." I nodded, remembering Auntie Dolly telling me how they used to often say, "hands wanted, no Irish need apply." She looked at me before continuing. There are individual capitalists and their representatives, both in politics and in management, who manage to rise above this trend, just as there are workers who fall into the trap of blaming other workers for their predicament. The working class followers of Oswald Mosley, other fascists and racists, are obvious examples. Robert Owen, the founder of English socialism and the inspiration of the international cooperative movement, was a cotton mill manager and ultimately a capitalist. Frederick Engels was a Salford mill manager and the son of a German capitalist. John Fielden, a Todmorden mill owner, was one of the leaders of the Chartist movement. and John Wood of Halifax worked with the Manchester Cotton Spinners Union leader, the Irishman John Doughty, in the campaign against child labour in the textile industry. Wood was a capitalist and worsted wool mill owner. Unfortunately, these capitalists were the exceptions that proved the rule. The bulk, to some degree or another, are dehumanised and brutalised by the economic system which holds all of us in its thrall. If we were in their position, we have to ask ourselves, would we be any different? Isn't the ability to empathise with others, particularly those in worse straits than you, and to cooperate for the mutual good, a basic feature of being human? Isn't that why your natural inclination is to help the underdog? Isn't that the basis of your sense of fair play? Isn't the need for people to work together socially, and the related belief that we should therefore treat our neighbour as we would like to be treated, the very basis of both democracy and socialism? She smiled once more before continuing without waiting for my answer. Christians claim that particular tenet as their own, although they are often the first not to practice it. However, if you delve, I think you will find it is a concept common to all major religions, and the reason why is simple. Human beings are social animals, and it is fundamental to our survival and our advancement as a species to work together. It is common to all religions because it was practiced long before any of the modern religions were even thought of. People discovered the strengths and advantages of cooperation and mutuality long before the Bronze Age. The fact is, as any social anthropologist will tell you, cooperation underpins the social organisation of the most primitive hunter-gatherer societies. They couldn't function without it, any more than the production process in our own factory could. Working together for the common good is instinctive, whereas religion is merely a manifestation of the human imagination, an attempt to explain our place in a material world we do not really understand. But the more we do comprehend, the more we use rational thought and scientific enquiry to understand the world in which we live, the more we come to understand the natural forces that shape our environment and their causes, the more our simplistic religious beliefs are shown to be myths and fairy tales. How many people today would regard a plague of locusts or an outbreak of polio or TB as an act of a vengeful God, punishing us for our sins? Who do you believe on such subjects? The prophet Isaiah, or scientific researchers studying the breeding habits of insects or the evolution of bacteria and viruses? Religion can inspire people and be a force for good, but it can also be, as its long history proves, a force for division, downright hatred, and the most disgusting, criminal and barbaric acts ever performed against humanity. This was the longest speech Maggie ever made to me, and it provided me with much to think about. Her views on religion I found particularly thought-provoking, and not without immediate relevance. Ironically, it was in no small part due to one particular tenet of Christianity and the Church of England that brought about Aaron Macmillan's downfall. Earlier in that year of 1963, a major scandal began to hit the headlines. Certain members of the establishment had organised a soiree which involved two fun-loving party girls by the name of Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis. They were wrongly alleged to be call girls. In any case, prostitution was not illegal, and such events involving people of influence were not unknown. It was an urban myth, not without strong foundations, that Labour politicians had a tendency to be corrupted by cash, whilst Tory politicians were corrupted by sexual lust. Normally the latter events would result in merriment on the part of some, puritanical tut-tutting on the part of others, and hypocritical expressions of holier-than-thou condemnation by the News of the World and the Sunday People scandal sheets. But they didn't bring down governments. The problem in this case was that one of the participants was a minor defence minister by the name of Profumo, and another a young naval attaché at the Soviet embassy. Both had attended the same soiree, and to make matters worse, Profumo, a married man, was alleged to have had an affair with Christine Keeler, who, as I have already stated, was wrongly described by the press at the time as a call girl. Adultery was, of course, an abomination unto the Lord, according to the teachings of the Church of England, and Britain was a Christian country, governed by Christian laws. According to the prevailing establishment view, Profumo had put himself in a position to be blackmailed, and this made him a potential betrayer of state secrets, in this case to the Soviet Union. There is no evidence that Profumo had been blackmailed, let alone given away any secrets, but Macmillan was forced to resign by the resultant media-inspired hysteria. Thus, in October 1963, Harold Macmillan bowed to the inevitable, and Sir Alec Douglas Hume, a peer of the realm who had renounced his peerage to stand for election in the House of Commons, succeeded him. This was a strange decision on the part of the Tory grandees, who at that time determined who should lead their party, or at least that was how it seemed to me. The ability to project one's image on television was now much more important than an ability to make speeches on the hustings, and Sir Alec Douglas Hume, no matter what his talents, simply did not come across well. Moreover, a general election would soon be inevitable, a general election that the bulk of my rebellious generation thought long overdue, although, much to the loss of the nation, the bulk of us did not have the right to vote, and would therefore have limited influence over its outcome.